On January 12th, 12 years old, Joan of France woke up before dawn, slipped into a heavy gown and covered her hair with a wimple. She walked stiffly in her new shoes, uncomfortable but pretty, her heart sinking as she approached the altar. She was getting married, but she didn't want to. She was only a child and she liked playing with her friends, reading stories about knights and dreaming of someday having a family of her own. But those dreams were crushed just a few hours earlier, when she had been handed over to the groom's family. Now she would never have a choice about her future. The bells chimed as she entered the church, drowning out her cries. A priest asked if she took this man as her husband, but nobody bothered to ask her what she wanted. After all, she was only 12. Her father, the Duke of Burgundy, said it didn't matter that she was so young. Marriage was a sacrament ordained by God, not a childish affair. Her mother, too afraid of her husband's wrath to speak up, smiled weakly and squeezed Joan's hand. Nobody seemed to care that she was a baby. Nobody cared except maybe Pierre, the groom, who looked as uncomfortable as Joan felt, but he was only 14. As the ceremony continued, Joan wondered if one day she would find happiness with Pierre. Maybe one day. Her story isn't unique. Across Christian Europe, Islamic regions, feudal Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, for centuries, 12 was a magical age. It was the age when girlhood ended and marriage began, and yet 12 is such a mundane number. It's barely in double digits. So why was it so significant? Why did the same world that sent kids to war, made babies into alchemists, and let teenagers rule empires draw the line at 12? To understand, we must go back to the year 1139. That's when Pope Innocent II convened a church council in the French city of Reims. Over 400 bishops gathered. The purpose of the meeting? Settle disputes over marriage. Back then, marriages were messy. Arranged by parents, they often involved hefty dowries, which were supposed to protect women from financial ruin, but they frequently became bargaining chips, allowing wealthy men to buy influence or land. Priests were even paid to keep quiet about underage brides. So in an effort to clean up this mess, the council passed a series of rules. One stated that any girl who menstruated was considered an adult. That may sound crazy now, but it wasn't actually a novel idea. Ancient Greece and Rome, as well as various Asian societies, already had similar beliefs. In fact, some ancient cultures celebrated a girl's first period as a rite of passage. But unlike them, the Catholic Church used this belief to create a legal standard, a universal age of consent. By deeming a girl fertile, and thus marriageable, the Church removed agency from her parents and priests. No longer could they profit from covering up child marriages. At least that was the theory. In practice, loopholes abounded. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, completely different traditions existed. For example, among the Hausa people of Nigeria, boys often married multiple wives after undergoing an initiation ceremony around age 15, with one wife typically marrying another at around 12. But across cultures, there were similarities. The overarching goal of marriage remained the same, to produce heirs, and as far as that was concerned, girls were ready at 12. But what did this mean for them? If we look at the case of noble girls, we see that their lives were dominated by politics. Their weddings weren't so much celebrations of love, but solemn events marking political alliances between families. Think of it like chess, where each girl is a pawn to be traded for land, power, or strategic advantage. For example, consider Eleanor of Castile, a 12-year-old Spanish princess who married the future Edward I of England in 1254. Her marriage was a diplomatic triumph for her father, securing his position as a powerful Christian king. Or take the infamous Isabella of France, who at 12 married the future Edward II of England, an option sadly open to many young girls throughout history. These girls became adults the moment they stepped into a marriage hall. They were expected to behave appropriately, to endure the advances of their husbands and bear children as soon as possible. If they failed to produce heirs, they would be mocked and pressured. Consider Elizabeth, the first wife of Ivan the Terrible, who endured years of taunts because she couldn't get pregnant. Such taunts don't seem fair, especially considering that she was only 13 when she married. The story is similar for peasant girls. Their marriages may have been less about politics and more about economics, but their lives were still dominated by production. The production of more people and more workers. Men wanted young girls because they provided more value. Young girls were assets who could work long hours in fields or factories. Take for instance Anne and Mary Budd, two sisters who married at 12 and 10 respectively. They lived in 16th century England and worked in a textile mill. Imagine spending your days dodging looms and spinning wheels, trying to finish your quota before sundown. That's what Anne and Mary did every day. And if they failed to meet their quota, their angry master would beat them. This was normal for girls who worked in factories. In fact, it was common for them to be abused, beaten, raped, all in the name of productivity. As for their husbands, they were usually older men looking for someone to help with domestic duties or produce more workers to sell. Sadly, stories like Anne and Mary's are all too common. It seems that everywhere and always men wanted young girls for marriage. But why? Well, some men were interested in children. Others simply saw young girls as easier to manipulate or control. Whatever the reason, The results were devastating. Child brides suffered lifelong health problems, not to mention the obvious pain of early childbirth. Consider Margaret, a victim of forced marriage. At 12, she gave birth to a baby boy. Unfortunately, her body wasn't ready. Doctors struggled to deliver the baby, but they were unable to save Margaret. She died shortly after giving birth, leaving behind a grieving family and a newborn son. Stories like Margaret's were all too common, as were stories of girls permanently injured during childbirth or suffering miscarriages. Child marriage was dangerous and it robbed girls of their autonomy. But here's the thing, occasionally things turned out differently. Sometimes young brides found love or respect, or even became powerful matriarchs. For example, consider Catherine de' Medici, who at 14 married Henry, the future Henry II of France. Though initially reluctant, Catherine eventually found love with her husband and bore him several sons, becoming a powerful queen mother after his death. Similarly, there were cases of young Muslim brides forming deep bonds with their husbands. In some rare cases, girls who married young found happiness and fulfillment, though it sounds almost biblical. In reality, though 12-year-old brides mostly became silent, obedient laborers, they were the backbone of society, producing the next generation and keeping households running. They cooked, cleaned and cared for children. Sometimes they also worked outside the home. But none of this was their choice. They didn't become housewives by choice, but by force. Nobody asked if they liked cooking or had skills like sewing. Nobody asked if they wanted children or knew how to take care of them. All they were told was that they had to do these things, and if they refused, they were punished. Husbands sometimes beat their young brides, but so did parents. If a girl resisted marriage, her family would force her into it. They believed that doing otherwise would bring shame upon them. Despite all this, throughout history, there were individuals who tried to change things. Philosophers like John Stuart Mill criticized child marriage, arguing that it violated a person's autonomy. Religious figures like Dorothy Sayers challenged the idea that girls were somehow prepared for marriage at 12, pointing out that Jesus had been 30 before his public ministry. But real change came slowly. It took until the 19th century for child marriage to start becoming illegal in Europe and North America. Today, most countries have raised the age of consent to 16, though some allow marriage at younger ages under certain circumstances. And child marriage continues to thrive in many parts of the world. Poverty, patriarchy, and tradition combine to make it seem like the only option for millions of girls. So the next time you hear someone say, "Oh, childhood is so precious," remember that for millions of girls around the world, it was stolen from them. They became brides before they learned to read, before they grew up, or even before they knew themselves. We owe it to them to remember these stolen childhoods and fight for a world where no child has to grow up too fast. Every girl deserves to stay a kid for as long as possible. The longer we let them be kids, the better. Thank you for watching.